Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the New York Historical Society. I'm Louise Mirror, the Society's president, and this evening's program is a particular pleasure to introduce because it was inspired by a great friendship between two men who have really transformed the way in which American history is taught and learned, including at our own institution. We're lucky that these great friends, Louis Lerman and Richard Gilder, have chosen to generously contribute their talent and also their capital to our institution. I'm proud to have the task this evening of introducing Mr. Lerman, who's established the Richard Gilder Distinguished Lecture Series, now in its second year, in honor of his friend and our friend, Richard Gilder. Just before I turn over the stage to Mr. Lerman, I want to recognize in our midst this evening some very special friends of the New York Historical Society, including our esteemed board members, Pam Schaffler, Russell Pennoyer, Sid Lapidus, and Benno Schmidt, and our Chairman's Council co-chair, Tom Gotchberg. I'd like to thank them for all they do, and I'd like to recognize our great good fortune in Louis Lerman and Richard Gilder. Let's give them a round of applause, please. I'd also like to recognize the president of the Gilder Lerman Institute, Dr. James Basker, and thank him for all the great work that he does for this institution, for his own, and for American history everywhere. Thank you, Jim. You're a great friend and colleague. I'm delighted this evening that the inaugural lecture of 2008 is led by Bunting, General Josiah Bunting III, who is in fact the chief historian on an upcoming exhibition opening this October at the New York Historical Society on Grant and Lee. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Louis Lerman.
Madam President, Louise Mirror, members of the New York Historical Society, friends of the Gilder Lerman Institute of American History. That all may know why we assembled tonight, my duty here begins in the reading of a paragraph from the dedication of the Richard Gilder Distinguished Visiting Fellowship. I quote, "The Richard Gilder Distinguished Fellows shall have mastered American history and the founding principles of the Constitution of the United States as amended. He will have demonstrated the ability to inspire Americans to study their country's history, even while learning its flaws, and to embrace their rights and duties as American citizens. In this spirit, we who love our country salute the study of American history, and we admire its distinguished historians. The Gilder Fellowship originates in this educational, civic, and patriotic sentiment. It was Mr. Lincoln himself who reminded us in his eulogy of Senator Henry Clay that we love our country, not only because it is our own country, but also because it is a free country. And it is a free country in virtue of the blood and treasure offered up at the American founding, even the more so because of the astounding sacrifices made by millions of Americans during the Civil War, black and white, North and South. For Dick Gilder, and for me, as undergraduates long ago at Yale, we began our trek upon the pathways of American history. For us, the 20th century of our birth and our maturity brought tragedies and triumphs to challenge and to vindicate the Declaration of Independence. And so we are deeply gratified to continue our pilgrimage here at the New York Historical Society, especially with this nationally recognized lecture series. Tonight, we shall hear from an American historian, a biographer, a novelist, a scholar, and a soldier who has devoted a lifetime to the study of our common culture in peace and in war. Our distinguished Gilder Fellow is not only a prize-winning scholar, but he is also a revered American professor and teacher, among other places at the Naval War College, at West Point, at Columbia University as a Burgess Fellow. All of this came to him, I must now confidentially disclose to you, only after his full intellectual rehabilitation from having labored under the yoke of the Royal Crown of England, there as a distinguished Rhodes Scholar at Oxford University. Then, having fled homeward in defense of the revolutionary colonies of his birth, he took up his hard-won military commission in the regular army of the United States of America, served gallantly in Vietnam, and in 1972, as a major, completed his active duty. It is true that the distinguished Gilder Fellow, from whom we shall soon hear, has been the president of 3 colleges, that he is now president of the well-known Scholarly Center for the Study of Peace and War, the Harry Guggenheim Foundation, and in all these places he has inspired 2 generations of students telling the American saga, one of the greatest stories ever told. For altogether fitting reasons, this annual Distinguished Fellowship takes the name of Richard Gilder, for who among us has been more moved by the study of American history? Who among us has done more to invest in the teaching of American history? In the creation of this fellowship, which bears his name, we honor a treasured American. So, Dick, would you stand just for a moment so all can see you, and thank you. So I have only a moment to say here, in the presence of this distinguished audience, the deep feeling of gratitude to Dick Gilder, which arises in me as I introduce the Gilder Fellow. I present to you Lieutenant General Josiah Bunting III.
We are at the back end of a 48-hour surcease between Super Sunday and Super Tuesday, and within 4 or 5 hours we will know the results, and I hope they are as gratifying to each of you as the result in Arizona was on Sunday afternoon. I'm fighting a bit of a February cold, and I hope you will make allowance for that this evening. I would like to say, first of all, I am especially grateful to Roger Hertog and the board and to Louise Mirror for the opportunity to present these lectures, and I am especially grateful to the man in whose name and honor these lectures have been prepared, Dick Gilder, who with Lewis and others has inspired and sustained with passion and generosity the urgent mission of placing the study of history at the direct service of the public weal, illuminating our past so that we may more successfully make sense of a crowding present. There is no truism that is more homely than this, and yet none is uttered with less conviction by a generation of academic historians who pursue history, most of them, for the satisfaction they derive, as Arthur Schlesinger once wrote, from a disciplined attempt to reconstruct the past, or in the words of a great French historian, for the joy we find simply in learning singular things. For public persons, people who contribute to the public weal and are influenced by it, however gratifying, these reasons are not enough. We need to learn from a purpose, and a constant purpose from the past. I am troubled by the remoteness of the American military establishment from the nation it represents and whose interests its government calls upon it to advance. I will be talking in these lectures about 3 Republican generals, Republican, of course, with a small r, 3 soldiers, each of whom commanded the American Army in the most consequential war of his time and century, George Washington, Ulysses S. Grant, and George C. Marshall, each of whom was a careful student of the nature of an army appropriate to our country. In the case of Washington, to the colonies whose militia and